Hello, I'm David Baynton and I'm a partner and head of employment with Ince. I'm joined today by my colleague Lydia Cammiade, who is a trainee solicitor in the employment team. Lydia and I will be speaking for 6 or 7 minutes about the government's new coronavirus job support scheme that opens on the 1st of November 2020 and replaces the job retention scheme, the furlough scheme, which closes on 31st of October and which has been a lifeline for businesses and employees during the coronavirus pandemic. Government figures suggest that as many as 9.6 million employees were furloughed for at least part of the period between March and June 2020. And the CIPD, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, have suggested as many as 4 million redundancies were avoided. However, although much sooner than many industries would have hoped, particularly the hospitality sector, who are dealing with 10 p.m. curfews and further restrictions in local lockdown areas, the furlough scheme, as I've said, will end on 31st of October, and the Treasury's replacement package announced by the Chancellor on the 24th of September is the Job Support Scheme, the JSS. Lydia, perhaps you could summarise how the new job support scheme will work, please.
Yes, so the government have said that the purpose of the JSS is to protect viable jobs in businesses who are facing lower demand over the winter months due to COVID-19. Employees can be placed on reduced hours, with the government then subsidising these wages for hours not worked. The employee must work at least 33% of their usual hours, which the employer pays for as normal. The government will then pay for a third of hours not worked, up to a cap of £697.92 per month. The employer will then pay for a further third in the same amount, with the employee then taking the hit on the final third. For example, if we take an employee who normally earns £350 per week for working 35 hours, if they agree with their employer to work 33% of their hours instead, their pay would be as follows. They'd receive £115.50 for hours worked, paid for by the employer as normal. A third of the remainder, being £77.39, would be paid for by the government under the scheme. Another third in the same amount would be paid for by the employer. So in total, the employee receives £270.28, which is 77% of their usual pay. I should say there is an exception for businesses such as pubs, which have been forced to close due to local restrictions in place under the new tier system. We're still waiting for the full details of this. However, it's expected that the government will pay 2/3 of wages, up to £2,100 per month, and the employers will only be required to pay national insurance and pension contributions. There's a few key differences I think worth highlighting, isn't there, David, between the furlough scheme and the JSS?
Yes, that's quite right. I mean, one key difference is that the employer making use of the scheme cannot make employees on the scheme redundant or put them on notice of redundancy whilst they are on the scheme. The government faced criticism for allowing businesses to use the predecessor scheme, the furlough scheme, to pay redundancy notice. And so it's likely that they wanted to avoid a repeat of this with the JSS. Whilst all SMEs are eligible, large businesses will need to meet a financial assessment test and will have to show that their turnover is now lower than before experiencing difficulties due to COVID-19. There's also an expectation, which may well become a legal requirement, that large employers will not make capital distributions such as dividends whilst accessing the scheme. It will also not be possible for employers to top up salaries above the government grant, which will mean that higher paid employees will see a much more significant pay cut on the JSS compared to the furlough scheme. Lydia, are there any other pitfalls of the scheme employers should be aware of?
Yes, I think it's worth highlighting a few. Firstly, it's important to note that each period of short working must be at least 1 week. Employers should also be aware that a change to working hours is likely to be considered a change to terms and conditions of employment. As with the furlough scheme, this should be agreed with employees and a record of this kept in case HMRC come knocking. conducting an audit, as you'll need to produce this written agreement. Further, employees do not previously need to have been placed on the furlough scheme to make use of the JSS. However, they do need to have been on the payroll and an RTI submission made on or before the 23rd of September 2020. The government have also indicated that the minimum hours threshold, currently at 33%, may be increased once the scheme has been running for 3 months. Any final thoughts, David?
Yes, well, you mentioned the minimum hours requirement, and I think given that the scheme may be little comfort for those vulnerable employees who are continuing to shield and are currently furloughed full time, some may feel that they now have little choice but to return to work if they cannot work from home. Employers should ensure that adequate risk assessments have been undertaken and COVID secure measures have been put in place to ensure all reasonably practicable steps have been taken to reduce the risk to employees. The minimum hours requirement also means that industries such as live entertainment, where many employers will be unable to provide any work at all at present, will not be able to benefit from the scheme, and redundancies would sadly seem inevitable. That's all for now. If you have any questions or would like any advice in relation to the JSS or any employment issues that you're facing, our contact information will appear in just a moment. Thank you for watching.